Kofi was a boy of Umuofia. The sun knew his skin, the red earth knew his feet. He played under the mango trees. Their leaves whispered secrets of old. His laughter was a bright song in the village. Life moved with the rhythm of seasons. The planting season, the harvest season, the dry season when the earth thirsted. Kofi's world was small then. It was full of joy. He was a child of the soil, innocent and free. The village of Umuofia was a close-knit place. Every man knew his neighbor. Every woman shared her joys and sorrows. Traditions were the strong pillars. They held the community upright. They were the paths laid down by the ancestors. From birth to the grave, tradition guided every footstep. The elders were the keepers of these ways. Their voices were heavy with the wisdom of generations. The young listened. They learned. This was the way of Umuofia. It had always been so. Among these traditions, one stood tall for boys. It was the cutting, the circumcision. It was more than a snip of skin. It was a passage. A boy walked through this fire to become a man. Men spoke of it with gravity, their voices low, their eyes serious. Women spoke of the courage it demanded. They spoke of the strength it bestowed upon their sons. It was a proud ritual, they said. It bound the men of Umuofia together. It was a mark of belonging. Kofi heard these whispers. He was young, but his ears were sharp. He saw older boys. They would disappear for a time. They returned changed. Their faces were somber, yet their heads were held a little higher. He did not understand the mystery fully, but he felt its weight, its importance. He knew deep in his small heart that it was part of growing up. It was part of being a man of Umuofia. The drums would beat for him one day. He waited, with a child's mix of fear and anticipation. The morning came like any other, yet it was not. A special air hung over the homestead. Kofi felt it. It was a heaviness in his chest, a knot in his belly that tightened with each passing moment. His mother's eyes held a deep sadness when she looked at him. His father's eyes, however, shone with a stern pride. The village was astir. The scent of special foods cooking drifted on the morning breeze. Then the drums began. A slow, steady beat. A beat that called to him. The men gathered. Their faces were serious. Kofi saw the glint of sharp instruments. He heard the low chants, words he did not understand. He was small. He was afraid. Strong hands held him. He tried to be brave. He remembered the whispers. A man does not cry out. The pain, when it came, was a sudden fire. It burned through his small body. He wanted to scream, to run, but he was held fast. He bit down hard on his lip. Tears welled, hot and stinging, but he willed them not to fall. The days that followed were a blur of pain. The fire in his body did not go out quickly. It smoldered. It throbbed. He lay on his mat in the cool darkness of the hut. The world outside, the sounds of the village, seemed far away. His body felt strange. It was wounded. It was marked. Each beat of his heart sent a fresh wave of pain through him. Sleep was a shy friend, visiting only briefly. He felt the rawness, the ache, the long, slow mending. He was changed, not just his body. Something deep inside him had shifted. A part of his childhood had been cut away. It was replaced by a quiet shadow. The men praised his courage. "You are a man now," they said, their voices full of approval. His father nodded, satisfied. But Kofi felt a sorrow he could not voice, a confusion that sat heavily in his young heart. He was a man, they said, but he felt only the wound and a strange, lingering question. Years passed. The rains came and went. Kofi grew. His limbs lengthened. His shoulders broadened. He worked the yams fields beside his father. His hands learned the feel of the hoe. He listened to the stories of the elders in the obi. He took part in the dances and festivals. He was a young man of Umuofia. Yet the memory of that day, the day of the cut, did not fade. It remained. A small, hard pebble in the stream of his thoughts. He did not speak of it, not for a long time. He watched other boys younger than him. He saw them approach their own day. He saw the fear in their eyes, hidden behind brave faces. He saw the pain they endured. He remembered his own fear, his own pain. A question began to sprout in his mind like a persistent weed. Why? Why was this suffering necessary? Was this the only path to manhood? The elders said it was tradition, the way of the ancestors, but were the ancestors always right? Could a tradition, however old, be flawed? One day, a trader came to Umofia. He was a man who had seen many lands. He sat with the elders and spoke of his travels. He spoke of cities, of different peoples with different customs. Kofi, curious, listened from the shadows. The trader mentioned, almost in passing, that not all peoples practiced this cutting. In some lands, boys grew to be men without it. This small piece of information fell into Kofi's mind like a seed. The world was wider, more varied than he had ever imagined. There were other ways. The questions in Kofi's mind grew bolder. They troubled his sleep. He felt a sense of disloyalty. He loved his people. He respected the ways of Umuofia, but this one practice, this one ritual caused a deep unease within him. It was a secret ache, a doubt that gnawed at him in the quiet hours of the night, when only the crickets sang. He felt alone with these thoughts. He feared to voice them, for who in Umuofia would understand such a questioning of the sacred? Kofi was now a young man. His voice had deepened, his resolve had hardened. He could no longer carry his silence. He decided to speak. He went to his father first. He chose his words with care, with the respect a son owes his father. He asked about the reasons, the deep purpose behind the cutting. His father's face grew stern. "It is our way, Kofi," he said, his voice firm. "It has always been our way. The ancestors decreed it. Do not question their wisdom." The words were a closed door. He then spoke to his age mates, the young men with whom he had grown. Some listened with curiosity, others with suspicion. Some laughed aloud. "Kofi, have you lost your senses?" one asked. "Are you not a man of Umuofia? This is what makes us strong." He tried to explain his feelings, the memory of the pain, the lack of choice, the questions about its true necessity. Few understood his turmoil. They saw his doubts as a weakness, a strange notion that had taken root in his head. The hardest step was yet to come. He decided to speak to the village elders, the guardians of tradition. This was a bold move, a risk. During a village gathering, when important matters were discussed, Kofi stood. His heart pounded like a drum. His voice trembled at first, but he found his strength. He spoke of the body. He spoke of the pain inflicted on children. He spoke of the possibility of choice. The elders listened. Their faces were like masks carved from old wood. A heavy silence filled the air when he finished. Displeasure hung palpably. The village began to change towards him. Whispers followed him now, not of respect but of concern, of disapproval. He was Kofi who questions, the boy who disturbed the ancient order. His family felt the sting of this. His mother wept in private. His father's anger was a cold fire. "You bring shame upon our name," his father said, his voice heavy with disappointment. Kofi felt the weight of their sorrow, their anger. The path of questioning was a lonely one indeed. He was an outsider in his own home. Section 5. The Fire of Realization. Kofi knew he needed more than his own feelings. He needed knowledge. A friendly trader who sometimes passed through Umofia had taught him the basics of reading. Now, Kofi sought out any scrap of written material he could find. He learned about the human body, about its intricate design. He read about the rights of individuals in other lands. Each new word, each new idea was like fuel to the fire of his unease. He came across new words like genital autonomy and bodily integrity. These words resonated deep within him. He began to understand the physical act of circumcision in a new light. It was not merely a symbolic cut. He learned that the part of his body that had been removed was not just useless skin. It had functions. It had sensitivity. It was a part of him designed for a purpose. A fresh wave of anger washed over him. It was a cold, hard anger, not just for his own loss, but for all the boys of Umofia, for all the generations who had endured this without question. A profound sense of violation took root in his soul. This growing anger did not consume him. Instead, It solidified into a firm resolve. This was not just a personal hurt, it was an injustice, a practice that harmed children. He felt a fire in his spirit, a compelling need to speak out, not just to ask questions, but to challenge the practice itself. He had to protect others from what he had endured, from what he now understood to be a harm. His doubt had transformed into a burning conviction. He knew he could not rest until things changed. He saw clearly now the power of silence, the fear that surrounded the tradition. People were afraid to question what had always been. He saw how the ritual was tied to the very idea of manhood in Umuofia. To question the cutting was, in their eyes, to question their identity as men, to question their connection to the ancestors. But Kofi knew this was a false connection. True manhood, he began to believe, was not about enduring a painful cut. True strength lay in protecting choice, in respecting the body. Kofi realized that anger alone was not enough. Anger could be a destructive fire. It could burn bridges instead of building them. If he wanted to bring change, he needed more than just fiery words. He needed understanding. He began to listen more intently, even to those who fiercely defended the tradition. He tried to understand their fears. He sought to grasp why this practice held such a powerful grip on the hearts and minds of his people. He knew he had to understand the roots to address the branches. He learned more about the stated reasons. The elders spoke of hygiene, though in a world with clean water and soap, this reason seemed less compelling. They spoke of social cohesion, of the ritual binding men together. They spoke of it as an essential rite of passage, a test of courage. Kofi acknowledged these explanations. He did not dismiss them outright, but he also saw that times were changing. Knowledge about health and the body had grown. Were these ancient reasons still strong enough to justify the pain, the risk, and the lack of choice? He started to frame his concerns in a new way. He tried to avoid language that sounded like an attack on their beloved traditions. Instead, he spoke about the evolution of understanding. He talked about health, about the potential for infection or lasting damage. He spoke gently about the idea of consent, about a child's right to grow up whole. He sought common ground, appealing to their love for their children. He learned that wisdom was not just in knowing what is right, but in how one shares that knowledge. One must offer a hand, not a fist. His own journey became one of continuous self-education. He read everything he could. He talked to travelers, to anyone who might offer a different perspective. He spent long hours in quiet reflection. He understood that advocating for such a profound change required immense patience. It required empathy, even for those who opposed him. He was no longer just the angry young man who had challenged the elders. He was slowly becoming a thoughtful advocate. He was learning to channel the fire of his conviction into a steady guiding light. Kofi did not try to overturn the mountain in a day. He started small. He began to speak with the young boys in the village, those who were approaching the age when the drums would beat for them. He did not preach. He did not command. He simply shared his own story. He told them what he had learned about their bodies, about the choices that might be possible. He encouraged them to ask questions, to think for themselves. He planted seeds of awareness. He hoped they would take root. He also sought out the mothers. He knew that a mother's heart often felt the deepest echo of her child's pain. He spoke to them softly. He talked about the potential risks of the procedure, especially when done in less than ideal conditions. He spoke about the lack of true medical necessity for most boys. He appealed to their innate desire to protect their children from harm. Some mothers listened with fear in their eyes, afraid of breaking with tradition. But others listened with thoughtful concern. A few began to ponder his words. Kofi understood the power of stories in Umuofia. His people learned and remembered through narratives. So he began to craft new stories, parables, tales of villages where young men came of age in different ways, stories of communities that found new rituals to celebrate manhood. Rituals that honored strength and courage without causing physical harm. Rituals that respected the wholeness of the body. He tried to make the unfamiliar seem less threatening, more possible. He painted pictures with his words, showing paths that led to strength through understanding, not just endurance. Naturally, there was resistance, strong resistance. Some accused him of abandoning the ways of his ancestors, of being corrupted by foreign ideas. The traditions of our fathers have made us strong, they would argue, their voices firm. Kofi would listen respectfully. Indeed, many of our traditions give us strength, he would reply gently. But true wisdom also lies in discernment, in knowing when a new path might lead to greater health and well-being for our children. Is it not wise to choose the path that lessens suffering, if such a path exists? Kofi's quiet conversations began to ripple outwards, like a stone dropped in a still pond. He found a few allies, other young men who had carried similar doubts in silence, an older woman, a respected midwife, who had seen too many boys suffer infections. Even one of the junior elders, a man known for his thoughtful nature, began to listen with an open mind. They started to meet discreetly, to share ideas, to strategize. They knew they needed to bring their concerns before the village council in a more formal, persuasive way. They prepared meticulously. This was not a youthful rebellion. It was a considered appeal for re-evaluation. They gathered information about health implications from healers and educated visitors. They researched alternative rites of passage from other cultures, looking for ideas that might resonate with Umuofia's values. Their focus was consistently on health, well-being, and the principle of informed choice, rather than on outright condemnation of the past. They wanted to propose a constructive evolution, not a destructive break. A new way to celebrate the journey to manhood, a way that honored the body. The day arrived for them to present their case. The entire village assembled under the great council tree. Kofi was chosen by his small group to be their primary voice. He stood before the elders, before his family, before all of Umuofia. He was no longer the hesitant boy who had first questioned his father. He was a young man, filled with a calm conviction. He spoke with eloquence, with deep respect for his people and their history, but also with an unwavering passion for the well-being of future generations. He spoke of a Umuofia that could be known not just for its adherence to tradition, but for its wisdom and compassion. The debate that followed was long and arduous. Voices rose in anger. Voices spoke with fear. The old ways were defended with passion. The ancestors were invoked. The very identity of Umuofia, some argued, was tied to this sacred rite. Others, however, listened to Kofi's words. They heard the logic in his arguments about health. They felt the truth in his plea for choice and the reduction of harm. The village was clearly divided, but something crucial had happened. A true conversation had begun. The silence had been broken. The unshakable had been questioned, thoughtfully and respectfully. Change, like the germination of a stubborn seed, did not happen in an instant. It was a slow process. It unfolded with the gentle persistence of the seasons. But the seeds of doubt and awareness that Kofi and his allies had planted began to take root and sprout. More families started to discuss the matter openly within their homes. Some, quietly and without fanfare, began to choose differently for their sons. They might delay the decision, or, if they still felt a cultural pull, they sought out the most skilled practitioner, ensuring the cleanest conditions, and sometimes waiting until the boy was older and could voice an opinion. The collective mind of Umuofia began, almost imperceptibly at first, to shift. The ongoing discussions, though sometimes contentious, fostered a new openness. The fear that questioning one tradition would lead to the collapse of their entire way of life began to subside. People started to see that true cultural strength might also lie in the ability to adapt, to protect the vulnerable, to embrace new knowledge. The idea that choice, especially concerning one's own body, could be a form of respect, began to gain tentative acceptance among some. Kofi became a figure of thoughtful change within Umuofia and even beyond as word spread. He had not sought to tear down the old ways with anger. He had sought to build a new understanding. He continued to advocate for education, for open and honest conversations within families and the community. He emphasized the importance of respecting individual choices, whether those choices led to maintaining a modified tradition with consent or to foregoing the practice altogether. His message was one of empowerment through knowledge and respect for bodily integrity. Kofi looked towards the horizon with a hopeful heart. He envisioned a future where every child in Umuofia and in villages like it would grow up with their bodies whole, respected, and free from non-consensual alterations. He dreamed of a time when tradition would serve the well-being of the people, not the other way around. A future where genital autonomy was not a foreign phrase, but a deeply understood principle of care and respect. The drums of Umuofia, he hoped, might one day beat for a new kind of passage, a passage into adulthood marked by understanding, consent, and the celebration of individual choice.